Okay, so that was Odetta, a great folk singer from 60s, 70s, 80s to the present, singing a Leadbelly standard, Midnight Special, which I picked for this show because it's an old folk song, and it comes from written by folks who have experienced incarceration, and just to show that something good could come out of something bad, right? And that's really what this show is about today, with my guests, Dr. Joni Schwartz and Professor John Chaney. And we're going to be talking about their book that they published, which is Gifts from the Dark. I hope you can see that. Learning from the Incarceration Experience. Say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Hugo.
Good afternoon, Hugo. Good afternoon, everybody.
Well, I don't think we were able to see the book there, Hugo. Let me pop it up there.
Oh, that's much better.
Yeah. Oh, you know why? Because I got to put it in front of my face because of the background.
There you go.
There you go.
Understand. I'm currently in my office, and I was getting a lot of grief from my producer about my background, so I'm using. I don't have windows like this. This is actually the vision I have for the 9th floor of the C building one day. So I'm actually coming to you from LaGuardia, C building, 7th floor, C7. What's our suite? C745. And my new office is, I think, C, because I got moved after the election.
Oh, okay.
Which we won't talk. But thank you both for coming on, and congratulations for publishing this book, and also congratulations for jumping the broom over.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so you're colleagues, you are co-writer editors, and now you are man and wife.
Yes.
So, many blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And you've both been on the show before, so I told you I'd spare you all of the, talking about yourselves,
yes.
or LaGuardia, coming to LaGuardia, being at LaGuardia. But I thought maybe you might want to check in because, how has life been for the two of you in the pandemic? Because, I mean, most folks here at LaGuardia probably haven't been able to see you because, face to face for quite some time. You want to talk a little bit about what that's been like in this period?
I'll start. I guess in the spirit of Gifts from the Dark, I have felt like I have become a better professor during this period. I really feel like I've had to go more in depth. I'm definitely better with the technology. I have alternate ways of instruction. So when everything goes back, God willing, face to face, totally, I think I will have many more tools and more depth. So in terms of the teaching, it's actually been a relatively positive experience for me.
It's definitely expanded my whole perception of teaching as well, Hugo, especially from the standpoint of the depth and perspective of what our students have had to go through over the course of the pandemic. When you see them in person, you have the class, and you may hear of course, one or two ancillary issues that our students have, but with this pandemic, I've really gotten a much better perspective of certain things that we usually take for granted, like how hard it is for a lot of our students who are single parents and having to take care of that component, comes into play. Also the fact of having to work, and a lot of our students who relied upon employment that's been either taken away because of the pandemic, and how much their employment will have an impact upon their being able to attend class, and all these different things come into place. So it just gives me a much broader perspective on some of the needs that we have to acknowledge in terms of giving our students support outside of the classroom, and that has also made me, I think, a much more understanding and a much more a teacher, much more in tune with some of the bigger components of what's necessary, to have a good teaching and learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the time we're complaining about the fact that we feel distant from our students in the teaching experience, but it's actually created a peculiar intimacy when
Yes,
right.
we're contacting them in all kinds of other ways. I actually called a student last night to let her know that because she hadn't shown up for 3 weeks, I had to give her the WN, and which, by the way, any faculty out there watching, your WN is your VOE roster is due today.
that's right.
Right, it is.
Anyhow, but she didn't pick up. Anyhow, but let it go. Because of, one of the things we're going to talk about is that the two of you work here with the Queens Correctional Facility that's on the corner of 47th Avenue and Van Dam, catty corner from the Van Dam Diner, which, by the way, is open till 2 o'clock today. For those who are looking for lunch, you have to do it during the show. But have you been able to continue that work given the pandemic?
Interestingly enough, I have an advisory board meeting with them tomorrow afternoon. This time tomorrow, I will be sitting with the advisory board members as well as with the superintendent of the facility and the deputy superintendent of programs. And the whole purpose of this, Hugo, is to make sure that we have a very good and effective and also an appropriate continuum of some of the fine work that we've engaged over there at the facility since 2017. We're going to see how we can do this in a way that is conducive to many of the pandemic-oriented guidelines. So yes, we are very much involved with that, as well as, of course, President Adams. He's also had a meeting with the senior heads over at Queensborough. We had a virtual meeting about 4 months ago, and it was very productive.
Also, I'll add on that some of the residents at Queensborough that were in our group are now out, and some after 25 years, and we have contact and we have a writing group on the outside. So for reentry, and that has continued, and actually several of the people that are highlighted in the book are doing amazing things on the outside now. And so the work continues once they come out.
That's great. You mentioned, so President Adams spoke to him. Did Dr. Mello used to meet with him as well? Or is this new with the new administration?
Good question. And this is actually the meeting that President Adams had with Superintendent Breslin and Deputy Superintendent Yan. This was an unprecedented event for our school.
Oh, really?
This is the very first time that we had I'm sorry, that's okay. This is the very first time that in anyone's memory where we had the president of our college meet with the superintendent of the New York State Department of Correction prison facility. It's never happened before.
That's exciting.
Yes,
because, what's interesting is that, obviously we work with Queens Correctional because they're right, like I said, they're right there. We walk right out of the E building and, we're there in 100 steps, right? But now with the online component, this means we could actually open up what we're doing to other facilities, right? If we chose to.
Well, it's an issue of technology, huh?
That's correct.
And so whether or not the prisons have the technology is another question. And that also is we bring that up in the book and both sides. But, as we stand now, most of the prisons don't have any capacity for that for much.
It's there, but it's severely limited, very, very limited.
That's deliberate, right? Because, we don't, for example, inmates can't have cell phones, right? Are not allowed to have cell phones. There would be no point to doing it, right?
So there is a trend where you have certain facilities in certain states where tablets are allowed for limited purposes, primarily email with significant others and families, but it's very, very seriously regulated. And depends upon the prison, but most it's a matter of course, budgetary considerations as well. So as we stand right now, Queensborough Correctional Facility, they do have limited access that could possibly accommodate maybe one, maybe two services. However, what we need to also understand is that LaGuardia, although we're the closest neighbor, we're by no stretch of the imagination the only partner. There are other agency partners as well as college partners, and they also have access, or at least I guess we'll be discussing a lot of that tomorrow. Who is actually engaged and who is actually has access to the technology to facilitate some of the programs that we envision being over there this year.
But your idea is a good one, because conceivably this could open up a whole world of instruction, and if there's the willingness and the capability and the money and the,
absolutely,
conceivably it could open up everything.
Okay, well, let's start talking about the book, and I guess let's talk about the notion of its inception. I mean, the two of you both are no strangers to writing and publishing. Dr. Schwartz, you're a little engine. I mean, not only are you publishing books, you published a book with your daughter, which talks about that relationship. You and I work together, or you really work, and I try to contribute to that online journal.
Dialogues in Social Justice.
Yes, Dialogues out of UNC Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. And Professor Cheney, you've also written and written together before. So why this book? What was the idea behind putting this book together?
Actually, it ties in very much to the message that you gave our listeners, with respect to the song, the music that you had involving Odetta, which is that to keep it simple, out of some of the most horrendous, some of the most objectionable circumstances that we have in our system and in our history, sometimes some amazingly wonderful consequences, can become byproducts of these very, very negative incidents. So the first thing that we wanted to do is to make sure that everybody had the fact that under no circumstances do we feel that prison is a good thing. We feel that it is a horrible circumstance. It's something that if we look at it from the world stage and looking at some of the horrible conditions that are taking place as we speak at Rikers Island, there is major need to consider revamping, overhauling, maybe even abolishing. However, having said that, there is no way that any of us in good conscience want to ignore the fact that not so much because of, but maybe in spite of these circumstances, we can point to and wanted to point to some major transformations and developments, and some of the people who have actually been able to turn the minus into a plus in such a way where perhaps the rest of the community and society can also benefit from these changes. So we wanted that word to get out there.
Right, and we're all prisoners of something, huh? And so people who have undergone physical incarceration, from my experience, individuals I have met have a lot to teach all of us. And having been in writing groups inside the prison, I've experienced the kind of reciprocity in that they teach me and I teach them. And so these diamonds in the rough, if you will.
I noticed that, and I'm not the best student. Like I said, I started the book. I'm about a third into it. And I noticed that one of the things you talked about is you did not want to focus exclusively on folks who are incarcerated for as a product of petty whatever crimes.
That's right.
You kind of want to talk about all types of incarceration, including political incarcerations. You mentioned even the Holocaust. Why? So this was a thematic notion of creating those conditions where a person finds themselves in a cell for whatever period of time, regardless of the reason?
Yes,
that's correct.
Yes, because we're looking at the experience, and so the cause or the reasons why were not the subject of this book, and so we have all kinds of prisoners, right? And as you said, a historical also, all down through history, and the tradition of prison, particularly writing, goes through the book, prison writing, which we make the case that we think it should be a canon. It should be one of the courses in college should be taught on prison writing. So we're looking at the experience, not the reason why people are in prison.
Maybe that would be the class that somebody would take who's a criminal justice major. Like if you have to take, if you were going to do a cluster, remember the clusters? I don't know where clusters are right now, but
Right.
You would take an English lit class that focused exclusively on writings from, by folks who were incarcerated, right?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I noticed the book is kind of there's a structure to it in the beginning here where you break it up. For example, adult and transformative learning and the prison experience. So that, and I didn't, it was interesting because I always argue that it doesn't matter what age a person is, that, the principles in teaching are the same. Because I've worked with all ages from kindergarten up, and my experience is, learning is learning, right? There are certain precepts, but you want to differentiate between pedagogy and what is it?
Andragogy.
Andragogy.
Andragogy, which is learning for adults. Do you want to talk a little bit about that difference? Because obviously, in most cases in prisons, we have juveniles in detention. For the most part, we're talking about adults, and particularly adults serving in the prime of their lives, right? That period, 15 to 35, 20-year period. In most of these lives. But do you want to talk a little bit about the difference that you've found?
Well, adults come with experience, right? Life experience. And so much more than children. And it's not this or that, teaching children, teaching adults. It's not a dualistic framework, but adults do come with more experience. They come with their own body of knowledge. They tend to be more self-directed. They tend to know what they want to learn and what they need to learn. And so it is it's that whole framework that then adults learn in a very participatory manner. Some would argue that children do too, but hands-on. So it's this idea of self-direction. It comes also from Freire, right? Everybody reads or thinks about Freire, whether they read him or not, I don't know. But this idea that the impact on the social world in which they live impacts what they want to learn and how they learn, and that we cannot learn in a vacuum.
And when you look at that whole concept from an incarceration format, and looking and considering the fact that the adults do come with a body of experience, and most of the experiences that they have are those that have resulted in negative outcomes, when they take the knowledge that is available to both kids and to adults, what the adults tend to do, Hugo, is that they take the knowledge and they apply it in a problem-centered direction, as opposed to looking at it strictly from the standpoint of the subject, because they're looking at it and they're applying the knowledge to their own body of experiences. And this is why we talk a lot about transformation, because this is what happens with the adults when they do take the knowledge that's acquired and that's available to everybody, but now they are applying that in a setting and in a situation where they're actually able to apply that knowledge to their own background. And this is where we see some of these amazing solutions, that they come up with, because it's more applying this from a problem-centered format as opposed to just looking at the subject for the subject's sake.
And it's funny, I get into trouble when I say this a lot, but, sometimes I get students, we all get students, and we can tell that, college is not a priority. Let's put it that way. And, my experience, they don't want to be here. And my particular belief is that, encouraging them to stick around when they're not ready for the experience. I don't know if that's for doing them a good service. My mother obviously forced me to go, kept telling me to go back to school, but that was after, being a hoodlum on and off for many years. And so I genuinely believe that, people should, if they need to take that time and come back when they're ready to be here, if this is the environment in which they can learn as well, because not everybody's cut out. Not everybody is particularly prepared to sit in a room with 30 people and wait their turn. Do you feel that that's kind of what happens?
No, I would agree with that. I don't twist anybody's arm to learn. It has to come from them, and there has to be a buy-in, and that's adults, right? So, hey, lay the table and set the meal. You either, and I'll do all I can to support you and so forth. But you know what? I can't force you. And that would be true with adults.
Interestingly enough, too, is that when we do see that the table has been set and we have adults who are incarcerated and they know that this is a possible opportunity, for them to perhaps sit at what we do find is that those who do choose to do so, they do so after having taken that time of deeply reflecting on what it is that they need and what they want. So what we find is when they do finally come over and they enroll in a place like LaGuardia, they tend to be some of our most directed, some of our most focused, and some of our best students, and some of those are highlighted in a few of the chapters in our book, as a matter of fact. But they tend to be a lot much more driven because they know what they want. So we do find that even, though some may or may not, some people may or may not be too successful once they're there, the tendency is that those who are incarcerated and they want this as an avenue of transformation, they tend to do very well.
Yeah, we talk about the disorienting dilemma, and incarceration for many is a disorienting dilemma that makes them reframe and relook at and reflect and all those good things that then lead to a transformation of sorts.
Actually, there's a chapter that you probably saw in there. It's called Silence and Solitude. For many of these folks, this is the very first time that they've actually had an opportunity without the distractions of the world that they from which they came, and they will use this time, to investigate and to do the deep reflection that will often result in a decision. Hey, you know what? If I really want to transform my life and to really be successful, perhaps going to school might be the pathway to do that. So we see that more often than you might think.
Yeah, I remember that, in the early chapters of the book, where you mentioned, and you yourself, you talk about your own experience with incarceration, yes. And you mentioned that happened to you, right? You called yourself the prodigal son, and that you found yourself sitting. It came to you in your cell that it was time to take some actions, and I think a lot of our students, we talk about this. They come to us, they have PTSD. Where most New Yorkers do, sure. By virtue of 9/11, by virtue of socioeconomic issues within their communities, by experiences in their homes, and they have this inability to sit still, to do what you're talking about, which is this deep thinking. And now they find themselves alone again, locked in this space. They have no access to a lot of the distractions that most of our students have. It can be overwhelming in a negative way, but it seems like in this case, you're saying that this is the positive experience that makes the change, right?
We're saying that for some, it's not a given, and this is the reason why prison in and of itself is nobody's gift. But the folks who do take that time to reflect and to try to turn this horrible situation into a vehicle for that's going to facilitate that reflection, there are times where we will see some amazingly wonderful, miraculous outcomes from that. But it is not a given that everyone who goes through this experience is going to have the same kind of a result. In fact, it can turn a person just the opposite. But yes, in that case, that's basically what we're saying, that these very, very positive transformations will often come from that deep reflection brought about from the solitude and the silence of the cell.
You remind me that they were doing these experiments with the color pink in prisons, where they would paint a room pink, and they found that initially it calmed people down, like folks who were experiencing whatever anger, violence, calmed them down, but they found extreme exposure led to increased agitation and then violence again. So maybe this case that everybody's going to respond differently to every single situation. I'm going to do the station break right now, and that way I want to talk about the composition of the book. You're watching LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. The show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guests today are Professor John Chaney from, I didn't mention this before, the Social Science Department of Academic Affairs here at LaGuardia, and Dr. Joni Schwartz Cheney, right? Hyphen, you've taken his name with the hyphen, from our humanities department in communications here in LaGuardia Community College. So I know when one of the things that I find amazing about the two of you is that you wrote this book together, right? Which I know is not an easy thing to do. So tell us about that process. How did you go about doing this? I mean, are you taking turns on the laptop, or does somebody write a chapter and the other one edit? How does this work?
First part is the think tank part. First of all, just to see whether we have a really good message that we want to impart to the world. It has to be something that we really feel. It has to be something that we really feel very strong about, because we know that there's a mountain of work that's ahead of us once we decide to make that move. As you know, this is our second endeavor together. This is our second major text that we did collaborate upon. But the first part is definitely a series of discussions and how we're going to break down the components of the message. In this case, the message that the world stands to gain quite a bit if they do take into account some of these amazing feats and these amazing accomplishments that have come from an incarceration experience. So that would be the first part. Then we divide the work, and
we divided certain chapters. John was the lead, certain chapters I was the lead, depending upon our expertise. And then we would do the first drafts, and really have to, of course, it took years, but we would, once we got the drafts, then we'd give it to the other person, and we would, revise and edit and discuss, and very intense process, and go through that several times with each of the chapters.
Not to mention the research and making sure that we have everything that is bolstered, our facts or our arguments that is confirmed by authentic research, and then we want to have it peer checked and have it reviewed not only by academic scholars, but we also want to address these issues and run them by the very people that we're talking about, and seeing whether we're on the right track there, and making sure that they agree or feel that our message is an authentic one, whether we have everything accurate, what it is about the book that needs to be changed, criticisms. So all of this is a part of that whole process.
The member checking and sending it to
member checking. That's the
member
term
checking, sending it to the some of the in particular women too,
That's right.
but mostly men, would send them to people who were in Queensboro, a correctional facility that came out of it, and said, well, what do you think? Does it ring true? Is it accurate? Does it gel with your experience? So a lot of collaboration, both between us and between people with the lived experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I saw that you mentioned Shannon Proctor was one of the folks that you thanked in there. You thanked a lot of folks. So I'm guessing you ran it by Shannon.
Well, what happened? No, we were part of a group, a summer writing group. Right?
The NIH Humanities Summer Workshop that she and Naomi. Naomi
Stubbs.
Also, yes, right.
Awesome.
Naomi also co-facilitated.
Right.
Our colleagues that participated in that, they were very, very helpful in kind of getting us on the right track with some of the early portions of the book, particularly the introduction and making sure that our message was understood, that people weren't, interpreting the book as some sort of a glorification of prison and things of this sort. They had some amazingly helpful criticisms, and Shannon and Naomi were both, responsible for setting up that format for us, so that we were able to get a lot of great feedback from our colleagues with that.
That's right.
Well, I did notice again in the beginning, you do talk about critical race theory.
Yes.
Right? And you talk about the economics of the prison system, and which are things that I've been, finding out about, or particularly, and how those played into why we don't necessarily want to reform the prison system. that there's money in it, particularly for in New York State, for these towns that have no other industry.
That's right. That's right.
And, but it's interesting because critical race theory is obviously being challenged now. I mean, I live in Connecticut, and in my town, folks are trying to take over the Board of Ed because they're afraid it's going to be taught. And the truth is, it's not being taught overtly, but obviously the ideas behind it are kind of, all over the place.
Well, it's been under attack for decades, right? But right now it's politically expedient to attack it. And the fact is, the matter is not so much critical race theory itself. It is, although that's the term that's being used, it's talking about race in general. It's about looking at history from other people's perspectives. And so people are afraid of that. They're afraid of looking at other narratives and rewriting our history books to include other voices. So I think, yes, critical race theory is the target, and that's being thrown around, but it's not that that's the first time. And to me, the fact that it's being attacked means that there's some validity there. Something, it's powerful, right? The ideas are powerful.
And the fact that the main pushback is in including a critical race theory curriculum in a college or in a school, that is scary to many people who see themselves as the direct beneficiaries of the current status quo. And they know that students, as well as people that are faith oriented, these are two of the most powerful population blocks that we have, Hugo, on our planet that can actually facilitate change. So if you have students that really understand the concept that the reason why they see some of the injustices that are going on have deep historical bias roots, they may decide to do things that's going to change that. And if they change this and try to make it right, well, then some people are going to be adversely impacted by that. So that's a very scary proposition for many people.
Let's talk about, because we want to get to it, but I didn't mention it in the break, but again, the book is, Gifts from the Dark, right here.
Can't see it.
I got to put it in front of my face.
There you go. A little bit.
There you go.
There, we got it. We have it now.
Dark, right? Learning from the incarceration experience. Each of you, why don't you take a little time to talk about what you think one of the great gifts are that you meant that are talked about in the book from an incarceration experience?
Wow. Well, there's so many, right?
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is hard.
Well, you know what? I'll start it off
Good.
just with chapter 1 alone. We talk about silence and solitude later on in the book, but the whole book begins with certain things that many of our listeners will be able to identify with right away, which is the writing. There are many times that people won't even think about picking up a pen or picking up a computer to type their thoughts or anything there. So we talk about the fact that one of the major gifts to the world to this day, for instance, would be Martin Luther King's letters to a Birmingham jail, from a Birmingham jail, something like that. We even have folks like Viktor Frankl, who was who of course was involved with the Holocaust. He would never have written what he wrote had that not taken. These are gifts that come to the world. That the things that would otherwise not have been written. Even someone as controversial as Jack Henry Abbott, who was very controversial, in his experiences because of the fact that he was very much involved in some heinous crimes. But even in his case, you saw certain literary gems that were created from his experience in being in the cell that resonated to the point where you had folks like Norman Mailer showing this to the world. That's just one thing that we talk about, the writing. People like Chester Himes, who blessed us with some of his writings that later became motion picture films and things of this sort. That's just one. We have other folks like, who have shown a lot of gifts in terms of the arts, in terms of the mind-body connection. there are so many different areas that that are known and unknown, depending upon your knowledge of the many people that are coming home from this system. But there are many gifts along those lines as well. But it starts with chapter 1. Starts with the fact that it has inspired many folks to pick up the pen and to share their gifts and to share their views with the world.
I can't pick one gift is more important than the other, but I will just mention a few real quickly. We talk about nonverbal communication because returning citizens and prisoners are really good at reading the room. They are very astute nonverbal communicators, and they pick up on everything out of the necessity of survival. Right? You have to be able to in prison. So they are very often very acute. Another thing is we touched on before was the issue of deep work and silence and solitude. One of the things that, we live in such a distracted environment, and the idea of being away from technology and social media and all the distractions that we have, and be able to go deep rather than wide in our thinking and our feeling is, which goes along course with the silence and solitude, is something that you find that some returning citizens really have an ability to be focused and deep. Even within a world of distractions. So that is certainly it. And then I will just mention also about the fact of the Black family. History has the Moynihan Report and so forth. There's always it's always been the slant from the deficit perspective, like there's something missing or dysfunctional, huh? Well, we flip it around and we look at the support and we look at the community of the Black family, and not from a deficit perspective. And that because many of our prisoners are Black, and so coming from that community, so we take a new look at the Black family as a support system and culturally rich rather than a deficit perspective. So those would be a few.
And totally diffusing the idea that there is some sort of inherent propensity for criminal conduct on the part of the Black family. But just taking it just one step further from a practical perspective, Hugo, and looking at the gifts that the incarceration experience can actually share with the world. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that right now, as we speak, we have, as a matter of fact, tomorrow at the board meeting, we're going to have Dr. Ronald Day, who himself was a formerly incarcerated individual. He's overseeing one of the major organizations that are involved in assisting recovering citizens and formerly incarcerated citizens, to get back on their feet. That's the Fortune Society. We have, of course, the newly stated deputy commissioner, over at Rikers Island, and he was also a formerly incarcerated individual. And because of the resilience and because of the transformation that he gave and all of the knowledge that he acquired, they're using folks like those gentlemen, and I can name many other people. And this is because of the experience that they were able to hone, and they were able to now to impart their knowledge to the world at large. And this has actually resulted in stronger families and even better quality of life with the community, because they're helping people to do, to actually acquire some of these resources that and use them in such a way where now they're becoming assets to the community.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I think you talked about it in the book that in many ways rehabilitation is not the point of prisons, and the way they can be run in some cases. So in many cases, these folks are the exception, right? The small few who actually come out of prison better in a sense of what they're going to accomplish. And it's kind of a sad fact, because a lot of the ideas that you talk about, some people actually might be against, because it's going to, again, change the way that the prison industrial complex functions. The fact that what it costs to keep a New York State prisoner or even federal prisoners in incarceration per year is more than it would cost to send them to Harvard or Yale. and which is, really says something. So, but
Well,
again,
the research is really clear that, providing education, providing college credits within the restoration of the Pell Grant, all of that is very, very positive, and really reduces recidivism, and that's clear.
That's true, and cost effective, much, much cheaper, as you mentioned, than putting someone in a carcerative setting for 1 year, and where they are receiving none of the resources, none of the services that's going to make them better, change their behavior, something that we can have a long-term positive effect upon. That's basically the aim, of true rehabilitation, and usually that's going to happen outside of a prison environment.
All right, we're moving into the last quarter hour of the show, so I wanted to give the audience an opportunity if they wanted to ask some questions. I'm also trying to pull up some questions that Dr. Cheney shared me, just in case I got in trouble, and so I think I've mentioned some of these. And this is kind of interesting that you mentioned it. Transformation is a brave act, right? How so? You want to talk about that? I could say some things about it, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
Sure. I guess we can jump on that a little bit. I guess the best way of approaching that would be to break it down, Hugo, into two different components. There is an institutional aspect of how this can be brave act, also a very personal one. Most of our students in criminal justice, especially in corrections and sentencing, they learn of this concept called prisonization. Prisonization is a very, very detailed and calculated strategy on the part of prison management to make sure that each and every person under their care, custody, and control basically complies with all of the regulations, large and small. They want to make sure that they are doing this in a way that is very, very non-conducive to significant transformational change, not conducive at all to being an individualization. So that in and of itself is a bit of a pushback when a person decides that they want to do something that might involve personal growth, knowledge, reading, writing, what have you. They often will run into institutional roadblocks. But probably even more formidable than that would be the personal challenge, because what you're doing there, and we talked about this maybe a little bit when we discussed the whole idea of transformational change and the different pedagogy approach that an adult will look at this as problem-centered. It's a very, very brutally honest endeavor and very painful endeavor for an individual to look at their past lives, applying the truth of what they're now knowing as the truth and saying, hey, I really messed up. Everything that I thought, everything that I learned, the values that I've acquired, the friends that I thought I had, all of that is basically wrong. And now I need to start from scratch. That is an extremely formidable and very, very challenging undertaking. And that by itself speaks of very, very uncommon bravery.
Here's a question that you talk about, which is reforming, the incarceration system here, and that it's everybody's job, that everybody plays a role. So what could we do? And this is whether we're talking about the LaGuardia community, in particular, faculty and staff, or as citizens of, this city, this state.
Okay, well, what you're doing right now is in your little corner of the world is good. You're getting the word out. As writers, we try to get the word out. All of us in our corner of the world, I think, need to be part of the change, whatever that means, whether it means having a radio show, whether it means writing, whether it means, and for LaGuardia, with that prison right across the street, hey, I mean, we would love to have many, many, many more faculty go in there and to, reach out and to connect. And I think we can also do a better job at recruiting people coming out for college programs. The reinstatement of the Pell Grant is a good step in the right direction. Some people protest, some people write policy, some people, we all, but to ignore it or to pretend this is not, when slavery was going on, people couldn't imagine an America without slavery. And we, I think, need to imagine an America without prisons. And that'll take all of us.
Once upon a time, and this is something actually that our criminal justice students learn. Once upon a time, the Supreme Court instituted this policy called the Hands-Off Doctrine, basically saying that the things that we see in our criminal justice system, especially in prisons, we should just leave that alone, leave that to the experts, and things will work themselves out. They're in a better position to do what's right for the system than us. We know now that is just not the way. This is the reason why we see some of the unrest, some of the objectionable and deplorable conditions that we see in many of the prisons, and of course today in Rikers Island. So many different avenues that individuals can take in terms of what we can do. And yes, because of the COVID situation, we saw people protesting in front of Queensboro, trying to get the prisoners that were especially those that were elderly out and protesting there. We had people protesting in front of the federal detention facility in Sunset Park because of overheating and overcrowding. But in terms of your everyday active endeavors to do something, it could be just as simple as changing your language. And anytime that you see a TV show, a news story about someone that's involved in the criminal justice system, you might want to consider saying a person that came from prison as opposed to an ex-con or a felon or something like that. You can start as basic as that. Words are very powerful, and they will change people's mindsets, and they will put people in a much more of a neutral frame of mind as opposed to an immediately negative frame of mind. So people can begin as simply as that. And those who feel more inclined, there are many, many avenues of activism in which they can take place and take part in.
Yeah, when I was reading in the book that folks who label themselves as convicts, they see themselves as going in and out of prison is going to be their experience for their entire lives, that they don't see a way out of that cycle. And which is, again, we haven't talked about this. We could be talking about this for a long time, but how, again, New York State, that prison population is made up of folks coming from a particular neighborhood in East New York. You called them the $1 million blocks last time you were on the show.
That's
and
correct.
they go in and they go out, and they're and that works for everybody. And it's certainly in the prison industrial complex. But this thinking that they are on this treadmill or whatever, this circular path where they're never going to break that cycle is sad. And it's language. It plays itself out in the language as well as just in the way they live their lives, and it's sad. We're running out of time, by the way. We've got about maybe 8 minutes, and 4 of those will be music. So I want to give you an opportunity. Any kind of last words, or anybody else that you'd like to thank? Now's our time.
Okay, well, I'll start off first. I'll try to make this short and sweet. First of all, we thank you, and we thank Jamie. We thank all of you for the time to showcase our latest publication. This is an amazing show, and we thank all of those who have taken the time and dedicated their time to listen to what we have to say. Anyone who is really interested, and this is especially true for our colleagues, that may be listening right now or will be listening on the podcast, we have some amazing opportunities for you if you do want to take your activism a little bit further. If you want to put a little bit of practice into your teaching, please contact myself or Dr. Schwartz-Chaney. We can definitely help to talk to you about any possible volunteer activities that may be available at Queensboro Correction Facility right across the street. Of course, as things develop with respect to the pandemic protocols. And please let us know how you like the book, all right? Because we put our hearts and souls in it. We think that you'll enjoy the book, and we are very interested in your comments. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll just say a shout out to Marvin Wade, Dario Pena,
Yes.
Michael Colbert, P. Harris, Sonny Jackson, Carolina Soto, and John Proctor. Those are just a few that are highlighted in the books and the Restoration Writing Group, and their stories that they so graciously allowed us to tell in the book. And, you know, Hugo, you said something about that these few individuals who transform. It's not everybody, but I think there are more transformations than we realize.
Good point. Good point.
And that there are many people, not all, but many who come from the incarceration experience, and they have undergone transformation, and they have something to teach all of us. Because as we mentioned before, hey, we're all incarcerated in some way, huh?
I just wanted to make a little time for, we do have an audience member named Javier, and then a bunch of numbers, who wanted to ask the one question, which is, what's your biggest personal takeaway from the experience of writing the book?
Go ahead.
Well, my biggest takeaway, that's a great question. I guess an even deeper appreciation for those people who have had the experience of incarceration and what they've taught me and how they've moved me, and how I look at the world differently because of their stories, and how it just seems normal to me that we ought to be learning from the individual with this experience, because I have grown from it.
That's pretty much what I was going to say, actually, because what my original approach was, as was Joni's, is that we have this message that we want to impart to the world. In the process of us deliberating and talking and hashing it out, and the research, and especially with the member checking, although a huge part of this was the teaching and sharing our findings with the world, I found myself in kind of like in a fairy-based type of a mode, where the more I taught, the more I learned. So it was, for me, it was a mutually satisfying situation, because I acquired as much knowledge as at least as much knowledge as I was trying to impart. So that was my main takeaway, that my students can also be my teachers.
I just want to thank you both. We're out of time, and I just want to, for our audience, here it is. Gifts from the Dark, right? Learning from the incarceration experience. And my guests today have been Professor John Chaney from our Social Science Department, and Dr. Tony Schwartz from Chaney from the, it's going to take me a little time, from our Humanities Department here in the Academic Affairs Division. Congratulations on the publishing of this new and very important, which maybe we should start, a book club and reading circles about it, because I think there's a lot of lessons for us all to learn. And congratulations on, for our students who are incarcerated in higher education in the prisons. And congratulations on your nuptials.
Thank you, Hugo.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everything.
And we're going to take us, Mr. Pope, our engineer, is going to take us out the way we started, with another famous lead belly cover that he used to do, but by somebody else. So thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.